Everyone laughed at her until the Korean Mafia boss saw the truth. I owe everything to Maya. For 5 years, she wasn't just my fiancé. She was the invisible brain behind my entire multi-million-dollar fashion empire. Every stitch, every masterpiece garment that made my label famous, she designed it all from the shadows. Park Ji-hoon's voice echoed flawlessly through the grand ballroom, his handsome face radiant under the crystal chandeliers. Maya Vance stood near the front of the stage, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and love. For 5 years, she had worked 16-hour days in a cramped basement studio, letting him take credit for her genius because he promised they were building a future together. Suddenly, the warmth in Ji-hoon's eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, calculative smirk. He raised his hand, pointing a sharp finger directly at her face. Which is why it breaks my heart to announce tonight that Maya Vance has been fired for corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and systemic fraud. She didn't build this empire. She stole it from me. And as of tonight, our engagement is over. Security, throw this penniless fraud out of my gala. The massive LED screens behind the stage flashed violently, displaying forged bank statements and doctored security footage. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Before she could speak, four heavy security guards grabbed her arms, wrenching them behind her back. 300 members of Seoul's highest elite class didn't look at the evidence. They looked at Maya's simple gray work blazer and stone-dusted trousers, which she had been tricked into wearing by Ji-hoon's cousin. People laughed, pointing and mocking her public ruin. Have you ever been set up so perfectly that even the truth sounded like a lie? Drop it in the comments. The architectural layout of a fashion house requires a balance between the chaotic energy of production and the clinical precision of retail display. At Jiyoung Design, that balance had been completely shattered over 5 years. Maya Vance knew every floorboard, every loose outlet, and every single hum of the fluorescent lights in the basement workshop. She had chosen that basement. She had told herself that the lack of windows kept her focused, that the damp air from the central heating pipes was a minor price to pay for creative freedom. But the truth was far simpler. Ji-hoon had kept her downstairs because a ghost cannot occupy the executive suite. On a standard Tuesday morning, exactly 12 hours before the engagement gala that was meant to solidify their partnership, Maya stood at the large iron cutting table. A masterpiece gown, a custom silk velvet piece commissioned for Madame Kang's upcoming birthday celebration, lay spread out under the heavy workspace lamps. It was an engineering marvel in fabric. The internal structure relied on a series of concealed silk-wrapped stays that distributed the weight of a 3-meter train without distorting the natural waistline. Maya had spent 72 continuous hours drafting the technical patterns on her tablet, using her background in structural design to achieve a drape that standard fashion pattern makers considered mathematically impossible. She reached for the inner lining of the bodice, her fingers searching for the small white satin ribbon she had sewn near the left side seam. It was her signature, a tiny, hand-embroidered silver initial hidden inside the structural mesh. Her fingers met smooth, empty fabric. Maya frowned, turning the heavy velvet inside out. The satin ribbon had been meticulously removed. The silver threads had been cut away with a microscopic seam ripper, leaving a tiny, frayed patch in the mesh that had been poorly covered by an iron-on brand label bearing the bold, embossed logo of Jiyoung Design. She stood frozen in the quiet basement, the heavy shears still cold in her right hand. The humming of the overhead lights seemed to grow louder, filling her ears with a dull, thumping roar. This wasn't a clerical oversight. A brand label doesn't accidentally replace a hand-stitched designer signature during a standard quality check. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments. She dropped the shears, took her tablet, and walked out of the basement workshop. She didn't use the service elevator. She took the concrete stairs, her boots echoing against the walls as she mounted the 4 flights to the executive penthouse. The glass doors to Ji-hoon's office slid open automatically. The room was flooded with natural morning light, a sharp contrast to the gray shadows she had lived in for half a decade. Ji-hoon sat behind a massive desk of imported white marble, swirling a small glass of mineral water while reviewing an advanced copy of a luxury lifestyle magazine. The cover featured his face, crisp and airbrushed, under the headline, "The New Monarch of Seoul Fashion." Ji-hoon, the source files for the Kang collection have been altered on the master server. And someone manually removed my physical signature from the prototype lining.
Why?
Ji-hoon didn't look up from the page. He simply turned the leaf, his voice smooth, casual, and entirely devoid of urgency. It is just standard branding alignment, Maya. The Kang family represents the absolute apex of old money in this country. They are deeply conservative and highly protective of their public associations. They do not need to see a foreign technician's initials on their private commissions. It looks cluttered. It looks unprofessional. Maya stepped closer, her fingers pressing into the edge of the marble desk until her knuckles turned white. Unprofessional? I spent 3 weeks straight without sleep fixing the internal load-bearing balances for that train. If it wasn't for my adjustments, the weight of the heavy velvet would pull the entire neckline down, exposing the client. My name belongs on those files, Ji-hoon. My name belongs on the lining. Ji-hoon finally closed the magazine, the heavy paper slapping against the marble with a dull thud. He stood up, his posture immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit. He walked around the wide desk, his movements deliberate and fluid, and placed his hands firmly on Maya's shoulders. He looked down into her eyes, his face shifting into that warm, reassuring expression he always used when her technical demands threatened to disrupt his marketing schedules. Maya, sweetheart, you are looking at this through the narrow lens of a pattern maker. We are getting married in less than a year. My label is your label. My public standing is the platform that will support our entire future. When Jiang Design wins the Kang retail account tonight, we win it together. Why do you care so much about a hidden satin tag? Do you not trust your future husband? I trust you, Ji-hoon. But I do not trust the way you keep keeping me in the dark. Every time an international buyer comes to the studio, you assign me to remote inventory checks. Every time an editor asks for the structural schematics of our collections, you present my digital files under your personal login.
You are not hidden, Maya.
You are protected. The public market in this city is brutal to outsiders. They would tear your aesthetic apart before you could even present a second line. I am the shield that allows you to create without dealing with the poison of the press. Now, please go back downstairs and make sure the presentation models are finished for the afternoon review. Madame Kang is arriving at the private estate at 2, and everything must be absolute perfection. Maya looked at his handsome, unlined face, searching for any trace of the boy who had sat with her on a studio floor in Chicago, sharing a single bowl of instant noodles while sketching dreams on butcher paper. That boy was gone. In his place stood a corporate executive who spoke of art in terms of valuation and volume. She pulled away from his grip, her hands dropping to her sides. I will finish the collection for this afternoon, Ji-hoon. But tomorrow, we are filing the partnership papers with the corporate registry. I want my name on the legal deed of this firm before the winter line launches. Of course, sweetheart. Whatever makes you feel secure. Now go. The tailors are waiting for the final drape adjustments. Maya left the penthouse, the hollow feeling in her chest expanding into a physical ache. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the secrecy was a temporary strategy, a necessary sacrifice to secure their position in an exclusive, xenophobic industry. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, the private boardroom at the Kang family's mountain estate was silent. The room was designed like a modern fortress. Exposed gray concrete walls balanced by massive panels of bulletproof structural glass that looked out over the mist-covered pine valleys of Bukhansan. At the head of the long table sat Madame Kang. She wore a traditional silk hanbok of a deep, midnight indigo, her silver hair pulled back with a jade hairpin that had belonged to 3 generations of her family. Her eyes were small, dark, and perfectly unreadable. Beside her sat her only son, Kang Junio. He did not wear a traditional outfit. He wore a heavy black wool coat over a dark silk shirt. His towering frame leaned back slightly in the leather chair. He didn't look at the fashion sketches spread across the table. He didn't look at the fabric samples. His gaze was fixed entirely on the large glass windows, his expression so completely still that he looked more like a statue carved from river stone than a human being. Ji-hoon stood at the digital podium, his voice projecting a sharp, theatrical confidence as he clicked through the collection slides. As you can see, Madame Kang, my vision for this winter collection relies on a revolutionary integration of traditional Korean silhouette structures with modern, heavyweight Western textiles. For your birthday gown, I personally calculated the distribution of the silk velvet pile to ensure that the fabric catches the light evenly from every angle, creating an illusion of fluid movement even when standing completely still. Madame Kang did not look at the screen. Her elegant, manicured fingers tapped once against the polished wood of the table. An impressive concept, Director Park. But heavy silk velvet has a natural weight variance that pulls against the bias cut. If you do not anchor the grain line at the shoulder seam, the fabric will stretch within 3 hours of wear, altering the length of the hem. How did you stabilize the internal grain without adding bulk to the shoulder line?
Jehan froze.
His practiced smile remained pinned to his face, but his eyes darted toward his notes for a fraction of a second. He had never actually looked at the grain structural layouts. He had simply approved the marketing descriptions that Maya had written for the portfolio. We utilized a specialized horsehair interfacing through the collar lining, madam. It creates a rigid support structure that completely neutralizes the stretch. From the corner of the boardroom, where she stood holding the backup fabric rolls and digital pattern drives, Maya felt a sharp spike of anxiety. Ji-hoon was lying, and it was an incredibly stupid lie to tell a woman whose family had owned the primary silk spinning mills in Incheon for half a century. Madame Kang knew textiles better than any corporate director in the country. Maya took a step forward, her voice clear, steady, and loud enough to break the stifling silence of the room. That is incorrect. The horsehair interfacing would add over 4 millimeters of thickness to the shoulder, causing the seam to buckle under the weight of the train. The entire boardroom turned. The Jiang Design marketing assistants looked down at their tablets, terrified of the sudden breach of protocol. Ji-hoon's eyes flashed with a murderous, freezing rage, but he kept his head turned toward the clients, his voice tightly controlled through his teeth. Maya, please do not confuse our distinguished clients with minor technical jargon from the assembly floor. She is our lead technician, Madame Kang. She handles the machine metrics for my drapes. She words things clumsily. Madame Kang raised her hand, a single finger extending slightly. Ji-hoon's voice died instantly. The older woman turned her head slowly, her dark eyes locking onto Maya's gray blazer. Let her speak. What is the actual solution, young lady? Maya ignored the warning glares Ji-hoon was throwing at her from the podium. She walked directly to the digital table, tapping the screen to bring up the hidden layer of the pattern schematic. We did not use an interfacing. The shoulder seams are reinforced with a double-woven silk twill stay that is cut precisely on the reverse grain. The stay acts like a tension wire, transferring the weight of the 3-meter train away from the shoulder and distributing it evenly down the internal corset bones. The exterior fabric remains entirely unburdened, allowing the velvet to hang naturally, without structural distortion. Madame Kang looked at the digital schematic, her head tilting just an inch. A tiny, cold smile touched the corner of her mouth. She looked back at Ji-hoon, whose face had turned a light shade of pink. Director Park, your technician seems to understand your personal vision far better than you do. Ji-hoon forced a light laugh, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple with a silk handkerchief. She is a dedicated worker, madam. She simply repeats the internal laboratory notes I leave for the staff. She has a mechanical mind, but she lacks the broader creative scope required to design a true collection. Throughout the entire 20-minute exchange, Kang Junio had not said a single word. He had not moved, but his dark, heavy eyes had left the windows the moment Maya had spoken. He had watched the way her posture changed when she discussed the mathematics of the silk stay, the sudden, absolute authority in her voice, the precision of her gestures. And he had watched the way her shoulders tensed, her chest dropping slightly, when Ji-hoon claimed her thoughts as his own notes. Junio knew men like Ji-hoon. In his world, the men who talked the loudest in the bright rooms were always the ones who had hidden bodies buried under the floorboards. He knew who the real creator in the room was. He knew who held the stone. The moment the meeting concluded and the glass doors of the estate closed behind them, Ji-hoon grabbed Maya's arm, his grip so tight his fingers dug into the muscle through her blazer sleeve. He dragged her toward the executive sedan parked near the gravel path, his voice a furious, ragged whisper. Are you completely out of your mind? You humiliated me in front of the largest retail account in South Korea. You are a ghost, Maya. A technician. How dare you open your mouth and make me look like an amateur in that boardroom? I saved you from looking like an amateur, Ji-hoon. You didn't even know how the shoulder stay worked. If Madame Kang had tested that horsehair lie, she would have cancelled the contract on the spot. I protected the collection. He threw her arm back against the car door, his face twisting into an expression of raw, unedited disgust. Listen to me very carefully. Tonight is our engagement gala. Every major textile supplier, every luxury department store executive, and every cultural editor in this city will be there. You will dress up, you will stand by my side, and you will look like a beautiful, silent accessory. If you open your mouth to discuss structural metrics or pattern layers again, I will make sure you never find work in this industry from here to New York. Do you understand me? Maya looked at him, the hot mountain wind blowing loose strands of hair across her face. The illusion was completely gone. She didn't see her fiancé. She didn't see a partner. She saw her jailer. I understand completely, Ji-hoon.
Good.
Get in the car. 2 hours before the grand gala was set to begin at the Grand Hyatt, Maya sat in her small apartment, staring at the elegant cream silk gown she had spent 2 months preparing for this night. Her phone hummed against the glass top of her dressing table. The screen showed the name of Seo Jin, Ji-hoon's cousin, and the senior marketing director of Jiyoung Design. Maya, darling, I am just calling to check on you. I know you must be incredibly nervous about tonight. I wanted to give you a quick update about the evening's logistics. Ji-hoon altered the event presentation at the last minute. Altered it? The invitations went out as formal black tie 3 weeks ago. Yes, but he wanted to make it feel more like a modern, industrial workshop celebration to emphasize the creative growth of the label. All the senior staff and the core design team are coming in casual chic. Tailored trousers, simple design blazers, clean lines. If you show up in that heavy silk evening gown, you're going to look completely out of touch with the new direction of the firm. You will embarrass yourself and Ji-hoon. Trust me, keep it simple. Wear your everyday work attire. It shows you're the brains behind the production.
See you there.
The call disconnected before Maya could ask for clarification. She stared at the blank screen, a cold weight settling into her stomach. She looked at the cream dress, then down at her gray work trousers and her worn blazer. She wanted to trust the call. She wanted to believe that Ji-hoon was finally ready to introduce her as the core technical designer, that he wanted her dressed like a creator rather than a socialite. She tied her hair back into a tight, severe bun, smoothed the stone-dusted sleeves of her blazer, and walked out into the rain. Have you ever trusted someone completely and had that trust used against you? Tell me below, because this moment right here is why this story hits so hard. When Maya stepped through the massive gold leaf double doors of the Grand Hyatt Luxury Ballroom, the air left her lungs instantly. The room was a blinding, roaring sea of pure opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a heavy, amber glow over 300 guests. Women moved through the floor in seven-figure haute couture gowns dripping in diamonds, emeralds, and heavy silk satin. Men stood in custom silk tuxedos with pearl buttons. There was not a single casual piece of clothing within a mile of the hotel. Maya stood perfectly still by the entrance, her gray work blazer and simple trousers making her look like a kitchen worker who had mistaken the door. The people closest to her turned. The laughter started small, a series of muffled snickers behind silk fans and diamond-ringed hands, before spreading across the ballroom like an infectious disease. Look at her. Is that Director Park's American fiancé? Why is she dressed like she just finished sweeping the factory floor? How incredibly disrespectful to the host. Maya's face burned with an intense, suffocating shame. She looked around the crowded room, her eyes searching desperately for Seo-jin or Ji-hoon, her hands shaking against her thighs. Suddenly, the main ballroom lights dimmed, and a high-intensity spotlight slammed onto the center stage at the front of the room. Park Ji-hoon stood there, looking exceptionally handsome in a custom midnight blue velvet tuxedo, holding a silver microphone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me to celebrate the global expansion of Jiyoung Design. The crowd erupted into applause. Ji-hoon smiled, his white teeth catching the light as his gaze swept across the room, landing directly on Maya where she stood frozen against the marble pillar. His smile didn't soften. It grew sharp, cold, and entirely merciless. He raised his left hand, pointing his index finger straight at her face. I owe everything to Maya. For 5 years, she wasn't just my fiancée. She was the invisible brain behind my entire multi-million-dollar fashion empire. Every stitch, every masterpiece garment that made my label famous, she designed it all from the shadows. The crowd murmured, confused by the sudden introduction. Maya took a small step forward, her heart hammering against her ribs, thinking that despite the clothes, he was finally going to give her credit. But Ji-hoon's voice boomed through the speakers, losing every ounce of its warmth, which is why it breaks my heart to announce tonight that Maya Vance has been fired for corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and systemic fraud. She didn't build this empire.
She stole it from me.
And as of tonight, our engagement is over. Security, throw this penniless fraud out of my gala. The massive LED screens behind the stage flashed violently to life, displaying altered bank wire logs, forged patent transfer records, and doctored security footage of Maya downloading core fabric metrics at midnight. Maya gasped, her voice completely lost under the sudden roar of the crowd.
No.
That is a lie. I wrote those files. Ji-hoon turned his back to the audience, his posture projecting the image of a betrayed, grieving visionary. Seo-jin stepped onto the stage beside him, taking a second microphone, her voice dripping with mock disgust as she looked down at Maya. Look at how she showed up tonight, everyone. She didn't even respect this elite class enough to dress appropriately. She came in her work rags because she knew she was caught. She is a penniless fraud who thought she could exploit our family's creative heritage. Security, remove this trash immediately. 4 heavy, muscular security guards moved in from the perimeter, their large hands violently grabbing Maya's arms and twisting them behind her back.
Let go of me.
Ji-hoon, you know those documents are forgeries. I designed those collections. I sewed those garments. Ji-hoon didn't turn around. He simply lifted a glass of vintage champagne to his lips as the elite class began to laugh. The sound was deafening, a collective, mocking roar of 300 billionaires pointing at her clothes, jeering as she was dragged across the polished marble floor toward the exit. Get her out. What a pathetic corporate rat. Maya felt hot tears of pure anger and betrayal stinging her eyes. She had given 5 years of her life, her youth, and her brilliant mind to a man who was now publicly destroying her entire reputation, just so he could keep her stolen work forever without a legal challenge. If this is hitting you right now, tap the like button. It keeps the story in front of people who need to see it. But the laughter did not last. Sitting at the central, high-security VIP table, a man who had been silently watching the entire performance slowly stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a dramatic gesture. But the simple movement of his heavy frame caused the chief hotel manager to instantly drop his clipboard. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the ballroom, spreading outward from the center table until the music itself seemed to die. 10 personal bodyguards in identical, immaculate black suits immediately stepped forward from the shadows of the room, forming a perfect, military-style protective wall around him. It was Kang Junio, the towering, legendary head of the Kang underworld Syndicate, who had been the guest of honor all along. The 4 security guards holding Maya's arms instantly let go of her, their faces turning completely pale as they backed away in absolute terror. Junio walked past the billionaires, his steps slow, heavy, and resonant against the marble. He completely ignored a shattered, trembling Ji-hoon who had frozen on the stage. He stopped directly in front of Maya. His dark, piercing eyes locked onto her pale, tear-streaked face. In a room full of glittering diamonds and fake smiles, the most dangerous man in Seoul looked straight at her like she was the only real thing in the room. He reached out, his large, warm hand gently gripping her trembling wrist, his thumb brushing against the red marks left by the guards. Are you hurt? Maya looked up into his intense, dark eyes, her breath catching in her throat.
No. But they're lying about me.
All of it is a setup. Junio turned around slowly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd like a scythe. He looked up at the stage where Ji-hoon and Seo-jin stood, their faces completely drained of blood. His voice dropped into a low, lethal rumble that filled every corner of the massive room. Who permitted these insects to laugh at the master designer of my empire? Ji-hoon swallowed hard, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped the silver microphone. He tried to force a respectful bow, his voice cracking through the speakers. Lord Kang, you do not understand the situation. This woman is an international criminal. She stole the private luxury collection patterns meant for your mother. She is a fraud. Junio took a slow, heavy step toward the stage. I examined those garments personally this morning, Director Park. The structural drapes and hidden seams use a specialized silk weaving technique that only 5 people in the world understand. I called the Fashion Institute in America, where that specific pattern was archived 5 years ago. The name on the original portfolio belongs to Maya Vance.
Not you.
The crowd gasped. The whispers started again, but this time, they were directed at a trembling Ji-hoon. People who had been laughing a second ago now backed away from the stage, trying to distance themselves from Jiyoung Design. Junio looked back at Maya, his expression softening just a fraction, though his voice remained filled with absolute, unyielding authority. You built a multi-million-dollar empire from the shadows, Maya. And you let a parasite wear your crown. Tonight, that ends. Madame Kang walked through the crowd, her indigo silk dress rustling in the quiet room. She stopped beside her son, looking at Maya with deep respect. Maya Vance, the Kang Corporation does not do business with thieves. As of right now, our multi-billion-dollar luxury retail contract with Jiyoung Design is officially canceled, and I am offering you a fully funded, independent fashion studio under your own name. The Kang family will provide the land, the flagship atelier, and the unlimited legal budget to crush anyone who tries to steal from you again. Ji-hoon dropped his microphone, the plastic cracking loudly on the stage floor. His face was entirely bloodless, his hands dropping to his sides. No, you cannot do this. That contract is the only thing keeping my label afloat. We have manufacturing debts. Junio didn't even look back at him as he took his own heavy wool coat and gently placed it over Maya's shoulders, covering the dirt stains on her work clothes. Take a good look at this room, Director Park, because it is the last time you will ever see the light of high society. By tomorrow morning, the Kang Syndicate will audit every single pattern you have ever claimed to own. Maya looked at Ji-hoon, seeing the absolute terror in his eyes, and then she looked at Junio. For 5 years, she had lived in the dark, letting the world convince her she belonged in the shadows. But as she walked out of the ballroom beside the most dangerous man in Seoul, she knew the shadows were gone. The war had just begun, and she was finally going to take back her city. The transition to her new headquarters was seamless, a masterclass in corporate execution that only an organization like the Kang Syndicate could pull off in less than 24 hours. By noon the following day, the top 3 floors of a shimmering, reflective glass tower in the heart of Gangnam were officially registered under the name Vance Haute Couture. 50 top-tier tailors, pattern makers, and textile experts stood in a neat, silent line, bowing deeply as Maya entered the floor. The air inside the facility smelled of steam, fresh linen, and the clinical scent of brand-new digital equipment. An older gentleman with graying hair stepped forward, holding a silver stylus. Director Vance, welcome. I am Chief Coordinator Choi. The Kang matriarch has instructed us that your word is the absolute law on this floor. Where would you like to begin the restructuring for the Kang collection? Maya took the stylus, a sudden surge of adrenaline replacing the residual fear in her veins. She walked over to the massive digital drafting table in the center of the room, tapping the screen to bring up the complex garment matrix of the luxury collection. We are discarding the entire front facade that Jiyoung Design processed, Maya announced, her voice echoing clearly over the state-of-the-art floor. Ji-hoon wanted a shallow, rhinestone-heavy aesthetic to impress the media. We're going back to the structural draping and seamless silk joinery. We will show the city what real fashion engineering looks like. For the next 4 days, Maya did not leave the building. She lived in a hyper-focused trance, sleeping on the leather sofa in her office, her hair pulled back, her fingers moving across the screens and fabric mannequins with a frantic, brilliant energy. Junio didn't interrupt her. He would occasionally appear at midnight, standing quietly at the edge of the glass wall, watching her work while drinking dark coffee. He didn't offer empty praise. He simply made sure that every resource she required, from specialized French loom software to rare Italian silk samples, arrived at her desk within hours. Have you ever had someone show up for you completely silently? No words, just presence? Tell me about it in the comments. On the fifth night, as she was finalizing the stress testing calibrations for a structured corset bodice, Junio walked into her private office, placing a small velvet box on the desk. You need to rest, Maya. The textile committee handles the final design verification review tomorrow morning. Maya blinked, rubbing her tired eyes as she looked at the box. What is this? Open it. She lifted the lid. Resting inside on black velvet was a solid silver drafting compass and a set of heavy, antique tailoring shears, their edges engraved with intricate traditional Korean protection symbols. It was an heirloom, heavy and immaculate. My grandfather used this when he built the first silk spinning factories in Incheon, Junio said, his voice quiet against the late-night hum of the city outside. He used to say that a garment only holds its form if the person who cut it has stone in their spine.
You have stone in your spine, Maya.
Do not let the chatter of the politicians tomorrow shake you. Maya touched the cool metal, a genuine smile breaking across her face for the first time in weeks. She looked up at him, meeting his intense, dark gaze. Why are you doing all of this for me, Junio? You barely know me. You could have just hired another fashion house to do this work. Junio leaned against the edge of the desk, his frame casting a long shadow across the blue-lit sketches on the screen. I know men like Park Ji-hoon. They are hyenas. They wait for someone else to kill the prey, and then they fight over the bones. I've spent my entire life surrounded by people who take things they didn't earn. When I saw you in that boardroom, defending the mechanics of that structural weave while your fiancé tried to make you small, I recognized you. Recognized me? You are a creator, Maya. You build things in a world full of people who only know how to destroy. The Kang Syndicate protects its assets. And right now, your mind is the most valuable asset in the city. The morning of the Textile Committee review arrived with a bitter wind cutting through the high-rises of Seoul. The municipal auditorium was packed with journalists, manufacturing moguls, and city officials. At the center of the front row sat Park Ji-hoon, flanked by Seo Jin and a team of high-priced corporate defense lawyers. He looked smug, convinced that his political connections would save his label from the Kang family's financial chokehold. The chief committee member rapped his gavel, his voice echoing through the microphone. We will now review the final manufacturing permissions for the Kang luxury collection. Giant Design has filed an injunction, claiming that the patterns submitted by Vance Haute Couture are stolen property, violating the original production contract. Director Park, you may present your grievance. Ji-hoon stood up, smoothing his suit jacket as he walked to the center podium. He projected an image of injured innocence, his voice full of practiced theatrical sorrow. Thank you, honorable committee members. It is a tragedy that I must defend my life's work against a former employee who has used underworld influence to hijack my label's intellectual property. The patterns for the Kang collection were developed inside my studio over 18 months. Maya Vance was merely a data entry clerk who took the layout files when she was terminated for fraud. I ask that the production permission be denied and returned to its rightful creator. The committee members nodded, murmuring among themselves. Ji-hoon looked back at Maya, a flash of malicious triumph in his eyes. The chief committee member looked toward the defense table. Director Vance, how do you respond to these allegations of intellectual property theft? Maya stood up. She wasn't wearing her work rags today. She wore a tailored midnight blue suit provided by Madame Kang, her hair pinned up rigidly, her posture perfectly straight. She didn't look at Ji-hoon. She walked to the presenter's console and plugged in her silver stylus. If the committee looks at the main display, you will see the master core files for the garment's internal support matrix. The screens flashed to life, displaying thousands of lines of intricate measurement code. Director Park claims his studio developed these patterns over 18 months. But what Director Park does not know is that every major textile drafting software utilizes an encrypted algorithmic background log. If you look at line 4702, you'll find an embedded digital signature written in hexadecimal code. Maya tapped the stylus against the glass panel. The code shifted, expanding to reveal a hidden line of text that had been hard-coded into the software sublayers. The text read, "Property of Maya Vance. Patent ID 992 Alpha. University of Chicago Engineering." The auditorium went completely silent. The journalists began taking photos, the flashes reflecting off Ji-hoon's suddenly sweating face. Maya's voice remained cool, sharp, and entirely devoid of hesitation. This signature was embedded 5 years ago, long before Jiyoung Design even existed as a legal entity. Furthermore, if you cross-reference the server logs from Jiyoung Design's mainframe from 2 nights ago, you will find that Director Park's login credentials were used to manually attempt to delete this specific pattern layer. He failed because he does not understand the structural language of the program he claims to have written. Ji-hoon's lead lawyer leaped to his feet, his face pale. Objection. This digital evidence has not been verified by an independent third party. It has been verified by the Kang Syndicate's Digital Forensic Division. The doors at the back of the auditorium opened. Kang Junio walked down the center aisle, flanked by 2 senior investigators from the National Forensic Service. He didn't look at the committee. He looked directly at the chief panelist, dropping a thick, leather-bound folder onto the clerk's desk. "Those are the certified forensic server logs from the city's central communication hub," Junio said, his voice carrying an absolute weight that silenced the room. "They prove that Director Park has been systematically embezzling foreign investment capital through shell companies registered in Hong Kong, using his firm's stolen design valuations as collateral." The chief committee member reviewed the documents, his expression turning grave. He looked up, looking past Ji-hoon as if the man were already invisible. "The injunction is denied. Vance Haute Couture is granted full, exclusive manufacturing permissions for the Kang luxury collection. Furthermore, the evidence presented regarding corporate fraud will be immediately forwarded to the district prosecutor's office. This session is adjourned." The gavel fell with a sound like a gunshot. Ji-hoon staggered backward, his knees giving out as he collapsed into his chair. Seo Jin grabbed her purse, quickly walking away from him to avoid the cameras that were now swarming the front row. The journalists surrounded Ji-hoon, their microphones thrust into his face as he stared blankly at the floor, his empire turning to ash around him. Maya walked out of the auditorium, leaving the chaos behind. She stood on the grand stone steps of the municipal building, the cold wind blowing across her face. Junio stepped up beside her, his long coat shielding her from the glare of the street level. He looked down at her, the silver drafting compass glinting in his breast pocket. "It is over, Maya. The city knows who built the foundation." Maya looked out at the skyline of Seoul, at the massive luxury flagship stores rising into the gray sky. For 5 years, she had been a ghost, a shadow hidden behind another person's name. But as she stood beside the man who had seen through the lies, she knew she would never hide again. The city finally knew her name, and she was going to build something that would last forever. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed, now you know why you should be. New stories every week. I'll see you in the next one.